Every time I look in the mirror, I feel like I don't belong in this world. My name is Amelia, and for as long as I can remember, I've suffered from a strange and terrifying affliction. I'm not blind. For me, everything seems normal, but every time I look in the mirror, all I see is the back of my head. The only upside to my problem is that it makes brushing my long blonde hair easy, but apart from that, it feels like a curse. The older I get, the worse I feel about it. It's really hard for me to explain it. People see me, but when they try to explain to me what I look like, the words they use to describe me don't seem to exist. It's the same for photos and even drawings of me. For one of my birthdays, my mother hired an artist to draw a portrait of me. My mother thought it would work. She figured if people couldn't paint me with words, they could capture my true appearance on canvas. The painter she hired was really talented and was famous in our town for being an amazing portrait artist. It didn't take long to see the frustration in the painter's eyes as she sat there for hours trying to draw me. By the time she was done, she had 4 beautiful pictures of the back of my head. Family photos were the worst and the most painful for me. Any of the family photos that made the wall had my family smiling proudly at the camera, but all you saw of me was the back of my head. I usually opted out of taking photos. It gets too depressing for me. It kind of feels like I don't exist. I'm present, but I don't have an identity. I've been seeing doctors for years, but no one ever gave me an answer for what might be causing this. I've had brain scans which always came back normal. I've seen countless psychologists, but they say I'm not crazy because if that was the case, then everyone else would have to be crazy as well. The few photos and portraits of me prove it's not just in my head. I always struggled with the sense I didn't belong in this world. I always had a distorted view of the world. My parents put this down to my condition, but I always felt the two were interconnected. There was always this gnawing feeling of despair where I felt I wasn't meant to be born, or I existed between realms of existence. My mother told me it was normal to feel like that it was your typical teenage existential angst. But for me, it went a lot deeper than that. It wasn't hormones or a brain injury or mental defect. For me, it was a terrifying, waking nightmare. When I was 17, I had my first school dance, and despite everything, I was excited. My best friend, Lily, helped me pick out a beautiful dress, a deep blue gown that complemented my long blonde hair. I felt almost normal for once, laughing with her as we styled each other's hair. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I could blend in with the other girls, that maybe tonight I wouldn't feel so out of place. But as soon as we arrived at the dance, that fragile sense of normalcy began to crumble. That night truly shattered any feeling of belonging when the photographers arrived, going from group to group, capturing memories. I had been in a small circle of friends when the photographer called us over for a picture. I hesitated, but Lily urged me forward, assuring me that I looked beautiful. We lined up, and for the first time in years, I hoped desperately that maybe this time it would be different. Maybe tonight I would appear like everyone else. But when the photo printed out and made its way around the group, there it was again, the back of my head, while everyone else stood smiling and radiant. The laughter and excitement in my group died, replaced with awkward silence. Lily tried to comfort me, saying it didn't matter, but I couldn't bear it anymore. I slipped out of the dance hall, walking home alone. That night solidified the isolation I'd felt for years, but now it was worse. It wasn't just that I felt different, it was that I could never escape it. No matter how hard I tried to fit in, to be seen like everyone else, my reflection would always betray me. By the time my 18th birthday came around, the feelings of not belonging had all but consumed me. I had spent the entire night hunched over my desk, writing out my farewell letter to my family. My hands shook as I tried to explain the inexplicable, how living like this, always feeling out of place, was unbearable. When I finally finished, I folded the letter neatly and left it on my nightstand. Taking one last look in the mirror, I silently begged for something, anything that would give me a reason to stay. But all I saw was the back of my head, cold and distant, hiding what I was about to do. My father's gun felt heavy in my hand as I pressed it to the roof of my mouth. Without hesitation, I pulled the trigger. I expected darkness, but instead, I woke up in my bed. For a moment, I thought the gun had misfired, but there was no blood, no pain, no damage to my face. Everything was eerily calm. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the mirror. When I looked, I froze. A girl stared back at me, wide-eyed and confused, but it wasn't the back of my head. It was me. For the first time, I was seeing myself, a real face. She looked so unfamiliar, yet undeniably me. My hair, my eyes, my features were all there, staring right back at me like the world had been flipped upside down. Panicked, I bolted from my room and raced down the stairs. But something strange caught my eye along the way. The family photos on the wall were all different. Every single person in them was turned away, their faces hidden, showing only the back of their heads. All except me. In each one, I stood facing the camera, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong, like I had always belonged there. It was impossible, and yet there I was, staring back at myself from the photos as if this had always been my reality. As if the entire world had been reversed, and the terrifying thing was that I didn't seem to belong in this world either. Story number 2. My twin sister suffers from a fake illness I like to call imaginary spousal syndrome. I think it's infecting our entire neighborhood. On the night of our 29th birthday, my twin sister got in a car accident. She was fresh out of surgery by the time I reached the hospital, and more wrapped up than an Egyptian mummy. She wouldn't quit asking about her husband, whose smeared remains needed to be scraped off the asphalt, so the doctors asked me to break the bad news. Gently squeezing her bandaged hand, I said, "Becca, you were in a crash. Tony's gone." The heart monitor beside her bed went crazy until the meds kicked in. After Becca got discharged, I invited her to live with me. I told my wife, Alice, it was only until she'd regained the ability to walk. On more than one occasion, Becca grabbed her crutches in her sleep and hobbled around the apartment, searching for her keys and screaming Tony's name, and at least twice a week she'd shake me awake and say, "Daniel, tell the truth. Was the accident my fault?" "No," I always replied firmly. Even though she'd done nothing wrong, Becca couldn't escape the shadow of what happened. So in the end, she used Tony's life insurance payout to buy a house in the country. This decision hit me worse than a ton of bricks. Becca was my only living relative, my closest friend. She'd almost been ripped away from me once already. Wasn't that bad enough? At first, we talked over the phone every day. This morphed into every other day. Her new job kept her busy, you see. Plus, she joined a reading group which occupied her evenings. Without her, I found myself adrift. I started driving the long way home from work, picking out landmarks from our childhood. We used to have a secret tree house, really a bundle of sticks tied together by a length of rope, in an elm by our house, and we once hid there for an entire day because Becca gave the first girl I ever kissed a bloody nose. Unfortunately, the girl's 3 older brothers threatened to turn me into a human slinky as payback. Clasping hands like we always did whenever life got too real, we promised we'd be there for each other no matter what. I would have killed to experience that closeness again. When Becca invited me to visit, I couldn't say yes fast enough. Alice wasn't happy about canceling our trip to Rome. We'd booked it to help decompress after the stressful year, and that ice still hadn't thawed when we drove down there. Alice just stared out the side window, her golden hair flashing in the passing streetlights. Becca's house sat on the lower slope of a mountain. A banner draped across the front porch read, "Happy 30th birthday, Bex and Daniel." "Well, if it isn't my baby bro," Becca said, greeting us at the door. She loved lauding our 5-minute age gap over my head. Like me, Becca inherited our mom's curly brown hair and dad's delicate chin. Our welcome hug felt nice, don't get me wrong. But something was missing. A sense of warmth, maybe? Alice and Becca exchanged a polite nod, then we dropped our coats off in a little cloakroom. Down the hall and to the left, A set of folded-back double doors connected a lounge and a dining room. Several guests stood around a long table covered with sandwiches and chips and salsa, murmuring hello as we walked past. In the lounge, Becca took her place behind a home bar with a mirrored backboard and said, "So what's your poison?" Secretly furious, I let out a low whistle. I had conflicted feelings about how well she'd flourished without her baby brother. Glancing around, I said, "Bloody hell. Nice, huh? I haven't even shown you the garden yet. 10 steps past the gate and I'm already in the forest. It makes getting rid of corpses a breeze. It is a pain keeping them all in the freezer. Tell me about it. Bet you're wishing you didn't stay in that toilet of a town now." Alice shot me an icy glare. I'd neglected to mention how Becca almost talked me into moving with her. Eager to lighten the mood, I said, "I don't think I could afford it. Not unless I started an OnlyFans. You'd probably make more accepting donations to not start one. What can I get for you both?" "I'll take a strawberry daiquiri," Alice added, making zero effort to disguise the anger in her voice. Same. While Becca mixed the cocktails, I glanced around the room. A photo of her and Tony on their wedding day hung from the wall. I said, "So how many folks are coming tonight?" "Oh, about 30 or so, not including Tony." "Tony?" Alice asked, confused. "That's right." "Tony who?" Tony Turnball." From the way she replied, you'd think it was the most obvious answer in the world. "He's running fashionably late, as usual." Behind us, conversation seemed to taper off. Either that, or the pop music playing from a hidden speaker grew louder. Alice said, "Let me get this straight. Are we talking about your late husband, Anthony Turnball?" Rebecca smiled in an overly exaggerated way that showed way too many teeth. "Oh, I'll need to remember that one. My late husband. You know, I once told his mom how bad he was at keeping time, and do you know what she said?" Alice and I stared at her, completely silent. "That boy was born 2 weeks late." My stomach twisted in a knot. Becca always had a killer sense of humor. A famous comedian once even encouraged her to try stand-up. So maybe this was an inappropriate joke? From down the hall, the doorbell piped up. "What the fuck was that?" Alice asked after Becca excused herself. "Just forget it. It was one of her pranks. Try not taking the bait for once." Prank? It sounded more like the surgeons forgot to give her an MRI scan. I tapped the side of her cocktail. What happened to taking it easy? With a roll of her eyes, she took a sip even sailors would describe as generous. When she lifted her arm, the gold bracelets around her wrist clanked together. That jangling sound was like a royal procession announcing she was about to enter a room. Becca re-entered the room accompanied by a tall man with gray, bushy eyebrows. "Okay, introductions. Daniel, I'd like you to meet the greatest neighbor on planet Earth, Ben." As Alice planted her empty glass on the counter, Ben's expression darkened, but then his eyes flicked toward me, and he was all smiles again. Ah, the famous twin. We left Becca to her hosting duties and relocated to the adjacent room, making ourselves comfortable on a ring of sofas surrounding a low glass table. The way Ben stretched out set my teeth on edge. Did he think he owned the place? He hit us with a barrage of questions like what we did for work, and barely waited for an answer before droning on about life in the IT game, which wasn't as dull as it sounded. Meanwhile, guests kept appearing, and soon we needed to raise our voices above the rabble. As my attention wandered, I caught part of a conversation about football. The 3 men left of me went quiet for 10 seconds before picking up a new thread about a recipe for beef stew without skipping a beat. Weird. "What about you, Daniel?" Ben asked, dragging me back to the tasteless conversation. "What's your dream car?" "Oh, I'm not much of a petrol head. If it gets me from point A to point B, it could be a Del Boy 3-wheeler for all I care." "Well, Po Buddy's Nerfect. Now Tony, there's a guy who loves his automobiles." All energy drained from the room. Alice and I exchanged a glance, then she leaned forward and said, "Did you say Tony?" "Oh yeah. If it's got 4 wheels and an engine, that brother-in-law of yours could write an instruction manual for it." Why, just last week he helped get my Subaru purring like a kitty. Ben set his whiskey on the table. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to shake a little dew off the lily. He said Tony fixed his fucking car, Alice whispered when we were alone. My ears do work, you know. Why's he talking like Tony's alive? It's just a joke. Becca told him to wind us up. Stop taking everything so seriously. Enjoy the party. Good idea. She shook her empty glass in my face, jewelry rattling away. Honestly, sometimes it amazed me that she could lift her arm at all. I marched over to the bar, glass in hand. A line of people were queued for a refill, so I made idle chit-chat while I waited, sticking to the typical safe subjects: weather, jobs, family. With a raised eyebrow, Becca said, "Another refill already?" "Please," I replied, a little apologetic. I wanted to ask about the Tony joke, but in the mirrored backboard, guests kept shooting me a sprinkling of looks, and my neck hairs bristled. Back by the sofas, Ben had a very bored Alice pinned down. I handed her the fresh drink, which she wasted zero time draining. Ben was explaining why birdwatching was more exciting than people believed when a chorus of greetings went up. Becca stepped through the door accompanied by a man in a red checkered shirt. On their way across the room, the guy shook hands with the various partygoers like a politician at a campaign rally, gradually working their way toward us. "And last but not least," Becca said, "I'd like you to meet my brother Daniel. Hello. His wife, Allison. Hi. And of course you know Ben. Everyone. This is Stu." Ben leaned forward so he could shake Stu's hand. "And his wife, Vicky." Without missing a single beat, Ben clasped an invisible hand inside his own. "Always a pleasure." Becca stared at me, hard. I searched her face for any hint of a punchline, finding none. Something about her expression sent a cold shiver down my spine. I swallowed a gulp. Pleased to meet you?" Attention shifted toward Alice, who, already well on her way to being drunk, stifled a laugh. "Delighted. Oh, and this is my friend Bing Bong." She gestured at the corner. "Say hi, Bing Bong." It was like a wet, heavy blanket got thrown over the party. One by one, other guests' ears perked up, pausing with food halfway toward their mouths. Ben's face was turning red. Unconcerned, Alice said, "Aw, don't mind Bing Bong, he's just shy. Trust me, get a shot of tequila in him and he'll be doing a striptease." My face started burning. Why did she always work so hard to embarrass me? Grabbing her by the arm, I said, "Excuse us." A cork shot out from a champagne bottle as we left the room, but the group holding it didn't react, just tracked us with their eyes. I marched Alice down the hall, hooking her arm because the alcohol had taken effect. Behind one door, we entered a room with a snooker table and framed pictures of famous Formula One drivers, like a time capsule of Tony's man cave. "Prank, huh?" Alice sneered. I dragged her into the next room, a bathroom, and twisted the lock behind us. "Daniel, these people are freaks. Let's get the fuck out of here." I took a moment, composed myself. Number, we should call the police. And say what? We're at a party and some of the guests brought their imaginary friends? There was a knock at the door, then the handle jiggled. "Occupied," Alice yelled. "Well, we have to do something. I can't just leave Becca." "Why not?" "She's thriving. TMZ are calling this the seance of the year." Shut up and let me think. I sat on the edge of the bath, head buried in my hands. There had to be a logical explanation for all this. "Read this," Alice said, jamming her phone in my face. She'd pulled up an article from a local news site. It read, "Victoria McCann dead at 37. Husband Stewart pays tribute after loss of beloved wife." The accompanying photo was of a younger Stu and a blonde lady at the finish line of a charity fun run. "Get your keys. I'm not waiting for these freaks to bust out the Ouija board." "No," I said, jumping to my feet. "Becca must be caught up in this mess." As Alice threw her arms up in desperation, her jewelry made a complete racket, more grating than nails on a chalkboard. "When are you going to stop making excuses for that woman?" I don't make excuses. Police. How many times did I tell you to say something about her using her phone and driving at the same time? And look how that turned out. We're not having this argument again. Yeah. Insufficient evidence to press charges, she said in a mocking tone. My jaw clenched tight. Alice never once even tried to understand the strength of a twin bond. I'd lost touch with Becca. That meant whatever trouble she got tangled up in was my fault. Our birthday celebration had become a rescue mission. I said, okay, my keys are in my coat pocket. I'll get Becca. You grab our things and meet me by the car in 5 minutes. Fine. With a gut full of dread, I returned to the bar. Becca, I need to speak with you, in private. She opened her mouth to protest, but I hooked her by the arm. Surely you aren't planning to steal the hostess away, Ben asked, positioning himself between us and the door. Stay out of this. It's official twin business, I snapped. It's okay, Ben, Becca said. The bastard gave me a long, piercing stare before stepping aside. Becca gave him a nod, which he returned. I was too concerned with getting her safe from danger to care what it meant. I nudged Becca down the hall and out the front door. I tried wrangling her towards the car, but she fought me every step of the way and then twisted free from my grip. What the hell, Daniel? Facing her, I said, Get in the car. No. Get in the car. No. I took a deep breath, composed myself. Okay, what the fuck is going on? Are you in a cult? Why would you even ask me that? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because you and those freaks keep acting like Tony's still alive? Or how about the pretend guests? Tony's stuck in traffic, she snapped. I grabbed her by the shoulders. Becca, I'm not being funny, but you do remember he died in that crash, right? He's stuck. In traffic. If you're in some kind of trouble, I'm here for you. No matter what. But I need you to tell me what's going on. I stared in her eyes, waiting for a response. Instead, she turned away. Alice was right. Coming here tonight was a mistake. An awkward silence fell over us. There was so much distance between us now. It was time to accept our relationship was finished. In a soft voice, Becca said, Do you remember the night Dad had his heart attack? Yeah, I sighed. When the doctor broke the news, I literally couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to pass out. Then the elevator doors slid open and you stepped out and I ran to hug you. And do you remember what you told me? That we'd get through it so long as we had each other. That's right. And straight away I knew things would be okay. Who could have guessed all it'd take to make me a liar was a freak car accident? It wasn't the accident, Daniel. It was Allison. Confused, I faced her. What? How's this her fault? What do you want a list? The entire time I lived with you, it was like she had a scowl painted on her face. She didn't... Or how about when I had nightmares about the crash? She'd make a big show about how annoyed she was. I woke her up. Believe me, the message came through loud and clear. That woman despises me. Wait, why's this on her? Even if you two didn't see eye to eye, we wouldn't have drifted apart if you never moved away. I moved away because you pushed me away. I needed you, Daniel. After... We made eye contact. The words were right there, caught in her throat. After the accident, you were all I had. Then suddenly, I didn't even have that anymore. So I found a place where people supported each other. Her voice was so raw with pain that a thorny barb of guilt stabbed me right in the gut. Did she really believe this nonsense about Tony? Maybe it started as a coping mechanism, and somewhere along the way she deluded herself into believing it. Either way, it didn't matter. I cared about my wife, sure, but I needed my sister. So long as we had each other, everything else was white noise. Becca. I clasped her hands like when we were kids. You're right. I wasn't there, but I am now. And I'm always gonna be. No matter what. No matter what. She threw her arms around me, her head resting on my shoulder. The longer we embraced, the more the tension melted away. That warmth that was missing before seeped back, as if we'd never skipped a beat. It was like a breath of fresh air when you've been holding your breath. But then, in a thin, raspy voice, Becca said, "I really hope that's true." "What?" Wiping away tears, she said, "I thought I could do this without you, but I was wrong. You said you wanted to move here, but I knew you never would. Not while she was in the picture." The way the light blinked out of Becca's eyes set my heart racing. Her expression told me she'd done something unspeakable. But what? "Please don't hate me," she whispered. My throat hitched shut. I spun on my heels and bolted inside, shouting, "Alice!" I charged into the cloakroom. From the doorway, I watched two female guests scramble to set my coat and Alice's bag back on the rack. "Oh, don't mind us," one of them said, turning toward me. I'm a bloody klutz, made a complete mess of things. Stepping forward, lowering my voice, I said, "What did you—" Down the corridor, another guest caught my eye. This one scooped down to pick up a small, golden object the shape and size of a bracelet. "Hey!" I shouted. In response, the man's eyes shot open wide and he scrambled into the lounge. "Allison!" I screamed, racing after him. Behind the door, the other partygoers were lying in wait, and their faces were not friendly. I pushed the closest aside, shoving my way through the sea of bodies, screaming, "Allison!" Several people tried restraining me. I threw a nearby chair and then a lady freaked out, rushing as if to help an injured, invisible guest. Next thing I knew, Ben's giant arms were wrapping tight around my neck. Another arm secured my waist. I thrashed around trying to break free, but they were too strong. The guests kept me pinned in the corner, and there was so much pressure around my windpipe my vision turned to black. "Everybody calm down." Becca's voice cut through the rabble. Now I could breathe again. The mob let her step forward. "It's okay, Daniel. Alice is fine. She's right over here." Where Becca pointed, the crowd parted like the Dead Sea did for Moses. A strawberry daiquiri and a pina colada, my late brother-in-law's drink of choice, sat on the bar. And look, Tony's finally graced us with his presence. She walked over and circled the counter and embraced Tony. Even went up on her tiptoes, lips puckered. Around me, the crowd beamed. Becca gestured for them to release me. Then the guests filtered in behind me, nudging me towards the bar. Becca shot me an urgent glare. Her expression made it clear she was terrified. But why? Because the party might have turned violent if I didn't play along? I swallowed a gulp and joined her. In a quivering voice, she whispered, "Give Alice a hug." I glanced at all the expectant faces. Swallowing a gulp, I threw my arms around Alice, which made the guests beam. But I was shivering from the chill running down my spine. Almost as if invisible, icy fingers closed around the back of my neck. As if on cue, the lights dimmed. And then Stu carried a chocolate cake toward us, starting a chorus of "Happy Birthday." Everybody else quickly joined in. As the crowd chanted, "Happy birthday to you," Stu set the cake on the counter. The candlelight illuminated Becca's face, and tears of joy were running down her cheeks. She hadn't smiled like that since before the accident. Well, if that's what it took to make my sister happy, so be it. Her and I interlocked fingers, and as the crowd applauded, we leaned forward, blew out the candles, and ushered in our 30s together.